We are very excited to have Bob Gibbs of Gibbs Planning here today. I've seen one of Bob's presentations before at the Crowfoot Ballroom in Pontiac, and it was a fascinating presentation. Bob's company, Gibbs Planning Group, is right in downtown Birmingham, but does work all over the country. In a nutshell, Gibbs Planning Group specializes in analyzing and planning complex historic and new urban commercial centers and offers complete master planning and real estate advisory services for the public and private sectors. Bob is an author, a Harvard lecturer, a distinguished fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects. He's been named one of the America's most influential urbanists and holds degrees from the University of Michigan and Oakland University. He is a lifelong resident of the Bloomfield area and has served on Birmingham's Historic Commission and Zoning Board. Gibbs Planning designed Bloomfield's Woodward Avenue landscaping, Birmingham's master plan, and Shane Park. So welcome, Bob. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'm a landscape architect and city planner, and what you just went through is what we call a charrette. And we are big procrastinators, and we always wait till the last minute to do our plans. And the charrette is a French cart, and in the old days, the architects would ride on the French cart while they were collecting the drawings to have one more little line. I specialize in city planning and restoring historic towns. And I'm from Oakland County, born and raised in Pontiac, and this is the Pontiac Courthouse, which was raised in the 1960s. And I have a great interest in squares, town squares, and plans. And just a few definitions. A town square is a small open area with geometric sides. And they are usually less than an acre in size. And they're in cities or towns, and they're surrounded by buildings, retail, and shops. A park is much larger. There's a whole transect of open spaces. A park would be much larger, maybe 80, 90 acres. There's national forest. There's plazas are quite small. A plaza may be the size of this room, very often less than a quarter of an acre. They're all hard surfaces. And in my practice, in our practice, we use specific language about what we're designing. A plaza would be appropriate in a city, but it would be inappropriate in Yosemite National Park, for example. So I'm going to use these terms in and out, and I'll help to explain them as much as I can. The square idea was really, in America, was introduced by Thomas Jefferson to be a public square. Up until then, in Europe and France and other areas, the squares were private, they were fenced in, and you had to have a key to use them. And Jefferson's concept was that if we're going to have a democracy, we need a place where people can get together to, what he said, to start the revolution. And that had to be a public place. And as you know, America really introduced the public national parks, and it became a very large part of our culture. This is the University of Virginia, which Jefferson laid out. He actually put the stakes in the ground and measured it. And it's built around a square. And this also was to be a democratic format where the students and the faculty and others could mingle and exchange ideas. University of Virginia was the first public university in the United States. Up until then, all the other schools were related to a religion. Jefferson's thought was that squares are where people get together to argue and to dissent and to protest the government. Of course, the civil rights gathering in the 1960s was an extreme example of that. It's considered the largest public protest in American history. But squares also are meant to be very local. We've been working in Houston, and when the Obama health care was being proposed, this daughter and mother came to the Houston Square with the sign to stop Obamacare. It was very important to them that they have a public room where they can express their ideas and complain and protest about their government and other things. That's a very, very American idea. Judge Woodward laid out Detroit based really on Jeffersonian plans. He used Lafayette's geometrics. Lafayette designed Washington, D.C. But Woodward based his plan really on the Jeffersonian idea of having public squares And he proposed public squares really for the entire southwest Michigan. The entire region was to be designed all in the very same square and very same grid system with a circle in the middle of each one. He designed Campus Martius in Detroit, and that was it is literally a public square, which has been greatly enhanced and cared for recently. This is the Judge Woodward's plan for Campus Martius in Detroit. It's where all axes came together for a very, very public place. One odd thing about public squares is they have to be public, and that means they have to literally be surrounded by a street or a lane. If they're completely privatized without a street or a lane, it minimizes their public accessibility. The Campus Martius in Detroit has been greatly expanded, but it also is, of course, a square. It has streets on all four sides, and it's about an acre in size. It's one of the great public squares in the United States and America. Pontiac had a public square. It was raised in the 1960s. Very classic, where the public square had a courthouse in the middle of the square. That was common really in all of the Northwest territories that Jefferson laid out up until about I-94. If you go south of I-94 in Michigan, most of the towns, Coldwater, will have a public square. North of that, the idea just went away and died. And it's very interesting to go across southern Michigan, you'll see that. The most northern one I know is in Howell. They have a very beautiful public square there, but that's about the most northern one I know. It was very common in Michigan. This is downtown Birmingham. Birmingham has a public square now, but the public square wasn't built until around 1965. Up until then, the public square wasn't existing, and until 1927. Until then, the public square really wasn't there. It was all city lots. There's a public square in Milford. This is the public square in Auburn Hills. All of these Oakland County cities had public squares that were platted. Lots were built around them, and at some period of time, the city sold those public squares to become lots, and they disappeared. But I've researched this, and almost every city in Michigan, even the most smallest hamlets, had a public square that was lost. This is the public square of Ortonville, which is still there. It has a library on it. Public square for Milford, which has been taken away. And then this is the Shane Park Square, which I want to talk about for a minute. Here's Lake Orion's public square, which was an island. And then Birmingham's public square was right in the middle of its 9-block grid system. Birmingham was laid out per Thomas Jefferson's grid. Jefferson believed that each block should be an acre in size, which is about 200 feet by 200 feet. If you measure that to the center of the streets, it's 300 feet to 300 feet. The Jeffersonian grid is a 300-foot by 300-foot square, and Birmingham was laid out with the Jeffersonian grid. You can see the original 12 blocks. They're squares. In 1927, the city adapted what's known as the City Beautiful movement, where the city built parks and squares edged with civic buildings. The extreme example is Washington, D.C., where the Great Mall was laid out in the City Beautiful movement with the library and the Capitol House on the end of each square, of the side of the square. Anyway, in 1927, the city hired a landscape architect from Harvard whom told the city that they should adopt the City Beautiful movement. The city should buy 6 blocks of houses, tear them down, and build a Shane Park and a beautiful civic center. So the city had the foresight to do that. They bought 6 blocks of homes, tore them down, and built Shane Park, the library, the city hall, the post office, the community center, and a church on the north side of Shane Park. You know, a very, very radical idea now, but that was a very common idea up until the Depression, that cities would acquire property and then build great public realms. Birmingham was the only city that I know of in Michigan that adapted this City Beautiful movement and built a square from scratch. This is the view of that. The City Hall looked like that up until 1928. And, you know, I can only imagine if the city would propose that today, it probably wouldn't get very many votes. So this is Shane Park today. It's built on, it was originally 1 acre by 1 acre square. I developed the master plan in 1996 and recently in 2015, where we brought in architect Andreas Duani, a very noted architect from Miami, and measured the square and recreated it into its City Beautiful movement. I'm part of this new urban movement, and what we do is we go around the country and we take careful measurements of the traditional squares, the traditional streets, lanes, buildings, civic sizes, and then recreate those into new cities. We plan and build new cities. That's Providence. So here you can see Birmingham's original grid, and you can see the City Hall to the left, the square, Birmingham Shane Park in the middle, the library, the post office, the community house. Those were all public civic buildings. The old high school was located, the Birmingham High School was located on the very end of that. And the idea was that we would have a more civil community, we would have a better community, a better quality of life if there was a public realm in the middle of it. Birmingham then retained another landscape architect out of Harvard, a fellow named Arthur Cummings, and he developed the concept for the Birmingham neighborhoods. And here you can see this is his plan for the proposed city Birmingham neighborhoods. And he adapted what is known as the Clarence Stein principle. Clarence Stein was another noted landscape architect who practiced in the 1910s and 20s. And the Stein principle was that in order to have a sustainable, pleasant neighborhood, you needed certain principles. First of all, the neighborhood needed to be at the most a half mile across, a half mile diameter. It needed to have a civic park or square or library in the middle. Its edges should have retail, stores and shops, and that it should be surrounded and designed in small blocks, really based on Jefferson's square acre block. That's Andreas Duani on the right, one of the founders of the New Urbanism. So Birmingham's neighborhoods have this. They're all about a half mile in diameter, a quarter mile radius, which is a 5-minute walk. A quarter mile, it takes 5 minutes to walk a quarter mile, which we felt would be more walkable. And they all had squares and libraries. So Corton Lake, for example, is a classic traditional neighborhood where it had Corton School in the middle. It has Mills Pharmacy and Corton Market on the edge. It's surrounded by Corton Pond and other open spaces and parks. Just a very, very classic neighborhood. And I think one of the reasons that Birmingham has been so popular and so successful is that its neighborhoods were carefully planned based on the Jefferson and Stein principles. This is a copy of the plan by Cummings. So the classic is the Corton neighborhood, where Corton School was built in the middle, and Corton markets and shops were built on the edge. I have participated in 2 very lengthy master plans for the city of Birmingham, the 1996 plan, and then recently the citywide plan, which we finished in, I think, 2023. In those plans, we did propose to adopt the Clarence Stein principles, to put commercial on the edge, to put a variety of housing from little single-family cottages to mid-sized houses to large mansions to little apartments, little townhouses, so that you could have a whole range of people living in the neighborhood. The concept of a sustainable neighborhood is that you can live there for 2 or 3 cycles of your house. You may move there for your first apartment, and then move into a larger home, and then a larger home, or retire there and move down from your large home into a smaller, compact townhouse so that you don't have to leave the neighborhood. By living in a neighborhood for 3 or 4 life cycles, you can have better friendships. It's better for the children, better for the seniors, better quality of life. There's a whole lot of things that go with that. What I found with the last plan is that it would not be possible today if Corton Lake were being built, or if Corton Lake didn't have Corton School and Mills Pharmacy. And if we were to come into the neighborhood today and say we want to build a 4-acre school in the middle of Corton Lake, and we want to build a 50,000 square foot shopping center on Maple Road, it would not be approved. People would go crazy, saying you're going to ruin our neighborhood by having a school in the middle, a shopping center on the edge, which is human nature to oppose that, but it's something that we believe is really necessary for sustainable neighborhoods. Not every neighborhood, but those that are walkable. This is a lost square in Troy, Michigan that we planned in about 15 years ago for the city of Troy. Troy wanted to have also a city center. There is no downtown in Troy, so they hired us to design a new neighborhood for Troy and to put a city square in the middle. An example of the Jefferson in a rural character is the Charing Cross Park. It was designed really based on those early principles. It's surrounded by a street on all 4 sides, which makes it very publicly accessible. And it preserves the open space, the ponds, and the lake. Today, if that were developed, probably the houses would back up to the lake, to the pond. Those lots would be sold at a premium, and then the neighborhood would not have the access to the park. Even if the park isn't used, even if people don't walk onto the park, seeing the park, having the visual pleasure of seeing the park to and from your home is a very 1910s and 1920s idea. There's a village green in Franklin, Michigan. Franklin was platted, this is the original plat, Franklin was platted as all single-family lots. A developer that did that came in to develop Franklin, bought those lots, just like in Birmingham, and made those lots into a green for Franklin. A green is larger, and he developed a green with the church on it, with the retail, the Franklin Market on the other side, very much in the Clarence Stein principles. And also it makes good business sense because the greens expand the public realm to those that can't afford to live on the green. When you drive to and from your home, seeing the green adds to your quality of life and adds to the value. So here's the Franklin Green right now. Again, this was deliberately built. There were to be lots there, and somebody had the foresight instead to build the public realm. Judson Bradway also was developing in the 1920s and 30s, and he also embraced the planning movement of the time. This is his brochure, and this is a view looking northeast across Cranbrook Road and Maple Road, and that green square is the intersection of Cranbrook and Maple. And Bradway also hired a landscape architect in the late 1920s, and at the time he used the Frederick Law Olmsted, the designer of Shane Park's principle. It's called the Olmstedian grid. And instead of making it a rigid grid, at the time the blocks were designed in a very curvilinear manner, following the grades and moving around the woodlands. They still kept the acre blocks, but they were in a very, very organic form. So Bradway had the wisdom to build this park. You can see the park and square. And realizing that instead of selling lots backing up to the park, by making the park accessible with streets on all 4 sides, it would make Bloomfield Village a more desirable place to live. And even if you didn't walk in the park or play Frisbee in the park, just having the pleasure of seeing the park would add values to the rest of the property, plus honor Jeffersonian's principle for the public realm. This is barely done today anymore. In our practice, we only do this with our plans that we build for the public realm. This is a 1940 photograph of Bloomfield Village. Inside that circle is Maple Road, east and west, left and right, and Cranbrook Road going north and south. If you look carefully in that circle, you'll see a roundabout, a traffic circle. Originally, Bradway planned a circle at Maple and Cranbrook Road, which also would have been a public place. The streets would not have gone through it. The streets would have gone around the circle, and he would have had another public civic realm. And it was actually like that until about 1947, 1948. What's interesting is that if you look, I'll have a photo in a minute, but if you look at the bank building, the two bank buildings on that, the former gas station site, now the credit union site, those buildings were built at angles to accommodate the square. So this is the overall view of Bloomfield Village, and here's the village also included, this is Losser and Maple Road, where the Kroger shopping center is. Bradway designed and planned a village, a commercial village at Maple and Losser, where Kroger is. And the village included meandering streets, tiny lots with shops and businesses, multifamily, little apartments, little studio apartments, and that corner was to be a small village of about 50 little stores and restaurants and about 50 little apartments. That was to make Bloomfield Village a complete neighborhood. It was to have the big mansions on Glengarry Circle, but also the medium and smaller homes, and then the very small apartments and studios in the village. And to make it more walkable, you have to create something for people to walk to. It's not just walkable having a park in the middle, but it's more walkable if you can walk and get your groceries, have dinner, have lunch, something to walk to. So very much Bradway had this proposal. He, for some reason, didn't develop it. I think it was depression, and instead it's now a shopping center. What's interesting, though, if you go back to the old plats in Michigan, you can actually see the streets and the little lots planned. And I don't know if you can see this, but the boundaries went to the curvilinear roads around it. The boundaries went actually out to the curves. And then the school that was there, I don't even remember the name of the school. What is it? Bloomfield Village, is that the name of the school? Well, the Bloomfield Village School was part of that idea. That was his civic building, was the school. So very much a classic 1920s planning, where you had the neighborhood, the acre blocks, the squares and parks in the middle, and then a village to walk to. Very, very classic. That's the kind of planning we do today. We only do that sort of planning today. So again, here you can see the little park on the left, and then the intersection where the roundabout was. There was a similar type of planning that occurred at Long Lake and Woodward in the 1910s, and it was called Bloomfield Center. And at Long Lake and Woodward, it was planned to be a village center. There were neighborhoods to the southeast. There was a neighborhood of large homes to the southwest. There was another neighborhood, and that was planned and developed by a group of developers who acquired the property, and then they planned to have a village with squares and greens, a variety of housing. The commercial, the Fox and Hounds, and the Kingsley Inn were part of that original commercial. So on the upper image, you have a view of one of the proposals for the Bloomfield Square. And on the lower left is the original Kingsley Inn. Before Kingsley Inn, it was another business. Very classic. This fell through really in the I believe when they widened Woodward. I think that made it impossible to build. Corton Lake in Birmingham also follows that same principle. Corton Lake On the east side and the north side and parts of the west side has the street going along the edges of the park so that it has that public accessibility. Again, a very classic Jeffersonian Stein-Duany principle that in order to have a public park, it has to have public access. Today, if Court and Lake were built in a new subdivision, it would have the largest, most expensive homes backing up to the lake. The lake would be entirely private, maybe with a token little access point at one area, and then the neighborhood would be built without really a public realm. Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills, and much of Oakland County was built and planned pretty much on those Jeffersonian principles, going back to the early 1800s. So if you look carefully on this photo, you'll see in the lower right, on the right, that there's about 10 homes or so that were sold with lots backing right up to the lake. That was not part of the original plan, but for one reason or another, that occurred. Now, when we design neighborhoods, when we design new parks, we are told not to put streets around them. It's a very, very controversial idea that if you put streets around the park, that no one will be able to walk to it and it'll ruin the park. We find the same thing when we're trying to put sidewalks or walkways in parks. There's a number of parks in this area, in Birmingham, for example, that have dirt or limestone walkways, which are fine except when it rains or when it snows. And so if you really want a public park, we feel that you have to make it walkable for all people, people with walking disabilities, people who are young or whatever. And that part of that Jeffersonian idea is to make public parks public for all. I think Court and Lake probably is the nicest lakefront park in Southeast Michigan. The city has beautifully maintained it. They're not afraid to spend good money on the walks and the public realm there. And it really is one of the reasons we believe that Birmingham, again, is one of the most desirable communities in Michigan, and why people like living in Court and Lake, or even if you don't live in Court and Lake or Holy Name, you can come here and walk. You can park your car right on the edge, and you can walk and enjoy the park. There are some cities in Southeast Michigan that have waterfront parks like this, but they sign them with no parking, and they make it very difficult to access the park. That's not a Jeffersonian idea. Anybody can park here whether you live there or not. This is a neighborhood that we planned about 20 years ago at Lasser Road and 13 Mile. This is across from Detroit Country Day on the southeast corner of Lasser and 13. And this has what's known as an English green. An English green only has streets on one side, and the other two sides have houses fronting onto the green itself. This property was zoned for 1 acre minimum lots, and it was zoned to be a cul-de-sac type neighborhood where you would drive into a cul-de-sac and you would have houses all facing on the cul-de-sac, and the public park would be behind the houses in the low floodplain area. We, of course, don't do planning that way. We worked with a developer to build small city lots. These lots are small 50-foot wide lots. There's about 25 homes surrounding the green. And then to make it walkable, we put the garages facing the back, and we put front porches on the fronts of the homes so that you can sit on the porch and you can observe the green, enjoy the green, and also really make it more sustainable because you can get to know your neighbors. This is based on that 1920s type planning. This has worked out very well. It's a very popular neighborhood. However, this and many of the neighborhoods that we plan are not allowed by local zoning code. Most of what we do is illegal to build in Michigan, and we have to fight. This was a 4-year in the trenches discussion with the city, because the city considered 1 acre lots to be small lots, and it just broke the rules. Here's a view of, it's called Westwood Common. Here's a view of Westwood Common. You can see the English Square on the bottom. You can see one of the houses with the porches on the upper right. These neighborhoods, again, are not legally allowed in most areas in which we work, but the market likes them. They're extremely popular, and the marketing experts will say that about 35% of home buyers want to live here, and they'll pay about 30% more to live here. That's why you see neighborhoods like Northville, Plymouth, Rochester, Birmingham are so popular, because they're very walkable, they offer that traditional quality of life, and they're not building them anymore. So you have this really pent-up demand that overly hypes the prices of the home. Here's the square that we proposed for Troy, Michigan. This is what I consider one of Oakland County's lost squares. This would have been a lovely place, we believe. There would have been about 1,500 homes living in this, and this would have been more of a town than rather a neighborhood. And to be public, again, it had the streets on both sides of the square and on-street parking that would be open for all. At the end was the civic building that would have been a city library or a city hall. Here's a square that we recently designed for a medical campus in western Michigan, and this was a hospital that wanted a place where all of their workers could live and live in the same blocks, live in the same neighborhood. And so this would have had homes from the very small studio apartment to the mid-size to the very large, expensive homes. And just, again, a very democratic idea, a very Jeffersonian idea that people should live next to each other, and that there should be a public realm where you can go and you can protest the government. You can stand on a soapbox and do whatever you want to do. That's a very, very American idea. Again, this was illegal in this location, and this required a lot of discussions with the local community. Why is it illegal? In part because you have small lots, but because you're mixing restaurants next to homes. You're mixing assisted living next to tot lots. We did one of these in Howell, Michigan, and the Planning Commission was very concerned that we were putting assisted living for seniors next to the daycare center. They were afraid that children playing in the daycare center would be too loud and that it would disturb and cause anxiety to the seniors. I mean, they really believed that, and it really took us almost a year to stand up for that principle. But studies will tell you that seniors have a better quality of life, they have better health, better mental health if they're around young people. Because of that, in part, a lot of the age-restricted communities are not working because nobody wants to be the youngest person in that neighborhood. They like being around children. Here's another example of a small square. This is a project that we're proposing in the Ann Arbor area. Again, this is a neighborhood of about 300 homes ranging from a very entry-level studio apartment to mid-sized townhomes to large multi-million-dollar homes. The public realm is the square. This is a square that's about an acre in size. It's actually in English close because one side of it has houses fronting directly on the square. Here's the Troy Lost Square. If you've been up in Harbor Springs, if you know Weequahic neighborhood on Little Traverse Bay, that's an example of the Jeffersonian public realm. The street along the lake, it has houses on one side, and on the other side you have the lake and the beaches. That's a very early Americana idea that everybody has the right to see the water on their way to or from their home, or even if they don't live there, you have the right to be able to walk along and enjoy the lake and enjoy the waterfront. Again, that would not have been built today. Today, the developers would have backed homes up to that, and the public realm may have been a small square or small open space in the back of it. This is one that we're designing right now up on a lake, an unnamed lake. I'm not going to tell you what it is, in northwest Michigan, but again, very much the Jeffersonian idea. This is an acre-and-a-half park in the front. The houses front the park, and then on the waterfront, to make it public, there's a restaurant, a cafe, shops, and then an acre-type square. So Oakland County was filled with squares. Oakland County was planned in the early 1800s based on the Thomas Jefferson principle. It was laid out in the Jeffersonian grid, the north, south, east, west grid of a square mile, 640 acres, then broken down into township sizes of 36 by 6 miles by 6 miles. In those, Jefferson called for the 1 acre blocks, like the Birmingham 1 acre blocks, to be anchored with a public place in the middle. And so that's a very American idea. I'm very proud to live in Oakland County. We've lost some of the squares, but there are very, very many nice squares today. The Birmingham Bloomfields represent that. In Bloomfield, Cranbrook, for example, could be counted, I think, as one of our public squares. There's a park across the street from Cranbrook next to the Christ Church of Cranbrook, which is laid out in one of those Jeffersonian ideas. And then Birmingham, I think, is one of the finest cities in the country because it adhered to those 1920 principles. It had the wisdom to build Shane Park, the library, the city hall, and to make its parks like Horton Lake accessible. I think one of the reasons Judson Bradway's neighborhoods were so popular is that he hired a landscape architect. He made his blocks curvilinear. He respected the trees in the woods, and then put in a public realm for all to see. This is the Pontiac Courthouse. Well, I'm going to end it right there and take any questions, I guess. Anybody?
You showed several times what was proposed for Troy. What is the status of that?
It's been shelved, unfortunately. The city loved the idea of this. It went to a public referendum, which it passed by a 60% referendum, but for other reasons, it wasn't developed. This would have been on the City Hall property. It was about 80 acres in size. It would have included, I think, about 2,500 homes, again, for the entire range of homes. And then it would have had a small village of about 60 or 70 stores and restaurants. In this case, it's interesting. The reason Troy spearheaded this was that the local developers, the office building owners, and a lot of the developers building new apartments and subdivisions said, we can't compete with Birmingham or Rochester because they have a downtown and they have shops you can walk to. Would you please consider building a city from scratch here? Not only for the civic reasons and for the quality of life reasons, but for many of them it was a real estate idea. So I think this would have been great. Hopefully it'll come back. Many of the plans, unfortunately I did an audit the other day, and we've been at this for decades. And I think we've planned over almost 2,000 places. And unfortunately, just a very small percentage of those get built for a lot of reasons. Other questions? Yes?
Detroit confirmed with you at all about some of the open land that's now in Detroit that could use a lot of creativity?
No, did work for a developer in Detroit where we looked at that, but no. The question was, have I been working with the city of Detroit? No. Which brings up a very important point is that you can have too many squares. You can have, believe it or not, you can have too much open space. You know, it'd be like being in a party with a great big ballroom and only a handful of people. It'd be out of scale. So in order to make the squares more public and more usable, we like to compress them so that people are in there, you have more interaction. As a rule of thumb, when you build a plaza, our simple rule of thumb is that you should be able to hear somebody talking from one side to the other. When I designed Shane Park, and when I designed it, we put a plaza in the middle of it. So Shane Park is both a square and a plaza in the middle.
Where does Springdale Park fit into your definitions of parks and squares, of course there's golf?
Yeah, Springdale Park is a classic example of that public realm, where it's preserved the open space and the natural space, but it's also very public. It's open to anybody. You can go there and park. You don't need a permit on your car to park and use the park and enjoy it, so that's very, very public. Yes, on the end.
Are there parts of the country more progressive in this movement? I think of Florida, where they're building model cities. They have, an influx of population, and they seem to want to go about it in a creative way.
Yes, the question is, are there other states, I think other regions in which this is more popular? Yes. In the Carolinas, in the Floridas, in Tennessee, and other areas, this is very, very standard. The real estate developers realize that a third of the market wants it, a third of the market will pay a third more to live there, and the zoning is more progressive. In Michigan, that's why almost all of our work is out of the state. In Michigan, it's legal in a lot of places, but the real estate developers aren't embracing it. In Michigan, they're just, building the subdivisions, snapping them out, and, doing very, very well. That's kind of a weird anecdote. Not a lot, but very often a Michigan developer will come to my office and say, I really don't like what you do. I'd rather build a subdivision, but the city said we'd have a much better chance of getting approved if it's one of your plans. Would you teach me how to do it? So, it's kind of fun.
Yes, there's a large open spot where the Kresge building was in Troy. Is there any talk about this type of design for that space?
The question is, for the former Kresge headquarters in Troy, are there any thoughts about that? There were two really beautiful, when Kresge's or Kmart moved out, there were two really beautiful new urban plans there. I wasn't involved in them, but they had the square, all sorts of housing, they were beautiful. I think they got stalled because of the Depression. I mean, the recession, which was a depression. I don't know what's going there now, but I know it's been raised. That would be a perfect place to have the town center. I think in my view, every cluster of homes should have a coffee shop or something you can walk to, which would be within a half mile. I think every cluster of homes should be a neighborhood where you can move up and down to 2 or 3 houses and still be there, where you have a civic element in the middle, a school or a park or a church, a place of worship or something like that. Yes. Another question? Yes, in the
Yeah, I'm the assistant director of this library, and so public spaces are something I do think a lot about. What do you think that we are losing by not having these public spaces being built?
The question is, what may we be losing by not having the public realm? I think quite a bit. I think first of all, it's challenging our mental health. The number one illness for seniors right now is loneliness. And I think that's true for a lot of people living in subdivisions, where the developer will sell you a big family room and all these granite counters, but you're not really buying a neighborhood. So I think the losses of not having walkable neighborhoods in public realm are that you don't have as many friends, as many social interaction. Your children have to be driven everywhere. In Corton Lake or Poppleton, you can walk to the school. Actually, in some cities now, it's illegal for children to walk to schools. It's actually illegal. So I think mental health, physical health, it's more walkable, quality of life. I mean, I can go on and on. Crime rates are less, home values are higher. There's not a lot of downsides, except the downside is that when a developer builds one of my plans in Michigan, it's usually a 3 to 5 year process. We planned a place by the Big Rock called Eaton Station. Beautiful townhomes, live-work where you can live on the first level. I think it's quite lovely. But it took 5 years to get that approved by the city, and that's a whole nother story, why developers don't want to do them. Another question?
Yeah, my follow-up to that then is, why are the laws and ordinances in opposition to this? How did we get here?
We're getting a little out of the realm of historic Oakland County, which might be another discussion, but why are they illegal? I think people are afraid. I mean, in the Birmingham master plan, when we propose, coffee shops that you could walk to and things, it's just people are afraid of that. They're afraid of, people are told us they're afraid of apartments. In a lot of meetings, people would say, I'm afraid of the other living there. So it's just because they're not used to it. When people live in these, not everybody, but when a lot of people live in these, they like them. Hopefully it'll come around. We're hoping for a revolution for that to come around, so we need more public squares, yes.
Why was I-94 sort of a line of demarcation?
Yeah, why was I-94? I think it's because, well, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to know why I-94 was. I don't know, maybe that generation forgot about what it was like, but it's fascinating, isn't it, to go to Indiana and every town has a square? I don't know. I wish they'd had more. And I hope someday that in Oakland County, they rebuild those lost squares. Every town in Oakland County had platted an original square. And maybe they'll do what Birmingham did, buy the houses and build it again. Yes?
Do you see a national trend towards building housing with more walkability included in the planning of it?
Yeah, do we see a national trend for walkability? And yes, we see a national trend in most states except this one for some reason. You know, it's not to be cynical, but when I tell a client, let's build a walkable neighborhood, you know, they'll say, I'd love to, but it's going to take 5 years to get it approved, or whatever. Yes?
I was really intrigued by Westwood Commons when it was going up. Is there any information about people's satisfaction living there, or maybe they tend to live there longer? You know?
Yeah, the question is about Westwood Common. I just.
Do they actually sit on their porches?
That's a good question. I hope I can. I'm going to make you guys dizzy. Sorry about that. Westwood Common is that English close. There's 25 homes around it on Losser and 13. Yeah, that's been very popular. The developer had, you know, many more applications for the homes than he could handle. So he sort of did some social engineering. He sold one house to an older person, one to a young family. Yes, the downside of building these new urban neighborhoods is that they become very popular and hyper expensive because of supply and demand. So Westwood, you know, the last house sold for 2x the first house. And so those affordable little studio apartments, it's just like in Birmingham. Birmingham's not that affordable because everybody likes it. Everybody likes it, but nobody wants it. It's interesting. Yes?
Birmingham Y is going to be building, and there's a swimming pool that they're going to be building, and there's no parking there. What do you think that will do?
The question is about the Birmingham Y with no parking. I don't know a thing about the Birmingham Y with no parking. But, you know, these are very radical Jeffersonian ideas. A, there should be public parks that are free. B, that they should be public, accessible, which means you should have a lane or a street around it. My office overlooks Shane Park. I've been there for a long time. It's fascinating because the community house children walk across the street to go to Shane Park, and then they run nonstop for a half hour. But if I were to go to a city and say I want to build a park and put a street around it, and I want a daycare across the street, or Baldwin House across the street, they would fight me on the street because they're used to roads, not streets. Streets are where people go slowly. Roads are where they go highways, so, you know, we tend to build roads. We planned a place in Rochester called the Village of Rochester. It was a shopping mall. The client tore it down, and we built a street in the middle. And the city fought us for a long time about the street. You know, they said that, you know, people will get killed every day, and it'll be awful, but if it's a street, it's not. I'm lecturing too much, yes.
How important is it to have good schools in the area? Are schools perceived to be good schools? Because Hazel Park kind of conforms to the kind of community that we're talking about. It has parks, they're public, there's affordable housing surrounding it, it's a walkable neighborhood, it's close to 9 Mile Road, it's close to Woodward, and the same could be said about Ferndale, that's becoming more expensive. But a lot of people in northern Oakland County wouldn't consider living in those communities because of the reputation of the school system.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the question is how important are good schools for a community? Yes, they're very important, but they're becoming, yes, they're very, very important. And But we're seeing a lot of developers willing to buy in systems that don't have great schools because their home buyers don't have children. You know, like in Birmingham, we did this interesting demographic. About, I think, 70% of Birmingham's residents don't have children, or they're living single, or they're over 60, which means a lot of them would like to live in a smaller apartment or condo. But it's just reverse of that. Only about 30% are built that way, and about 70% are over 50 years old. Yeah, schools are important. And again, from my real estate developers like schools because they put it in the middle of the neighborhood, or they put a library. You know, they like civic buildings because it makes the property more valuable. Yes.
What is your opinion of the development that's happening in Auburn Hills? And I'm speaking of the area, what I call downtown, Squirrel Road, Auburn Road. It's really, I think, becoming a cottage town.
Yes, thank you. The question is, what about Auburn Hills' new little town they're building? I think it's brilliant. Auburn Hills is building, as you may know, it's Squirrel and, I don't know the other road. Auburn, Squirrel and Auburn. They're building a town, and it's fascinating because it's got restaurants and neat apartments and parks. Yeah, right. Right. It's beautiful. It has one of the lost squares, by the way, in Auburn Hills. So yeah, when those get built, they're extremely popular. There's a need for it. I mean, a lot of us don't want to live in a 4-bedroom colonial anymore. You know, yes, Auburn Hills is really on the forefront of that. Other cities are.
They also have those high-rise apartments all over the place that's being built.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Yeah, there are high-rise apartments being built all over the place. It's just, I mean, that'd be a whole discussion of why are people afraid of being able to walk to a coffee shop, you know, but they really are. And I mean, you can just imagine if I went to Corton Lake today and said, we're going to build a 4-acre school in the middle, and we're going to build a 50,000 square foot shopping center, we're going to build a fire department next to it, fire station, you can imagine people are just afraid of that, which it's human nature because they don't know. Yes?
It's sort of going back in history. In the 1927 development of Bloomfield Hills at Woodward and Long Lake, do you know who the people were behind it?
I do know who, yes. The question is, who were the people behind it? Yes, I do, and I cut that out of the image, but yes, they are, and yes, they're published in, there's a book on the, yes, I'll get to you, but they're published names, yes.
Who determines the on the street if they put a sidewalk or put your leaves out? Does the city determine that?
Yes. Thank you, John. The question is, who determines when you rake your lawn whether leaves can be deposited on the street and picked up by the city? I know in Birmingham, the code was that you could do that if there were if you had curbs and gutters, and I think that was a safety issue, but the city makes that decision. Yes.
Where in Ann Arbor is that proposed?
The community in Ann Arbor is 2 miles south of Briarwood Mall on State Street, and my son and I are developing that to make that work.
Right on the edge of Pittsfield Township.
Yes. 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 Yes, sir. Yes.
Does the onus of the extra costs fall on the developer or the city? The city obviously has to approve the plan. Are there ways they can use tax abatements or other incentives to promote these type of policies?
The question is, I believe, who pays for the extra cost of building these, and it's always the developer. The real estate developer has to usually pay for it. Sometimes there's public assistance where the public may build the park or the square because it's going to be a public park or square. So you know, that's why we push so hard for public spaces, because if you can't afford to live in there, you can at least park and enjoy it. You know, in Bloomfield Village, where I've lived for years, you don't have to live there to use that little park, that little square. It's very, very Jeffersonian. But yes, usually the developers pay for it, almost always. The streets and in the public realm, yes. Anybody else? Yes.
Do you know where Jefferson got these ideas? What was his inspiration for this?
Where did Jefferson get these ideas? I don't know. But, you know, he spent a lot of, I like, you know, I'm a nerd, I like architecture and planning history. Jefferson wanted everything rural, agrarian. So his streets, he originally preferred them to be curvilinear. And he wanted to design, George Washington's main job as president, he was ordered to design Washington, D.C. And so Jefferson and him argued about whether it should be all farms and land and, you know, curvilinear. And Washington, to his credit, said no, you know, we wanted to build a city. So he sent Jefferson over, he made him the ambassador to France, got him out of the country, and then hired LaFont to make the little plan. Got Jefferson out of the way, you know. Anyway, a little story. Yes?
Well, so for some of that idea, I assume, have you been to Lexington Green, Massachusetts?
Yes, I've been to Lexington Green, yes.
So there is an open space where the Revolutionary War started.
Yes.
And, you know, that was an open space in that town. I don't know when it was developed, but it was quite open.
Yes, Lexington, questions about Lexington Green, Virginia, or Massachusetts? Massachusetts. Yeah, yeah, the Lexington Green, where the Revolution had its first shot, I believe, it's a green, and a green is more agricultural, more rural. And in early America, they built the green so you could have your cows roam around and your sheep. They were actually built as part of the community agriculture. And then, of course, it's the public realm. It's just. Mm-hmm. Oh.
It was an area where people would congregate at, which is actually where some of the Minutemen came in and pulled the holes in the wall. But I mean, that was a tavern there on the side of the green. That's why you have been there.
Yes, I've been to, yes, thank you. There's one interesting thing is that when you develop a new subdivision today, the city will say statistically you need a certain percentage as open space. So, but it's open space, it's not public realm. So usually it's behind people's yards, you know, in wetlands and floodplains, you can't build without the public realm. And so you can, if you actually build smaller public realm, but it's public, then it can have a more benefit, yes. So anyway, I'm very big on Birmingham and the Bloomfields and most of Oakland County, and Birmingham really is, to me, one of the most model cities. We work all over the world, and I lecture in Birmingham all the time. Birmingham really was one of the model cities, and it's an extremely well-managed city today. In the 95 plan that we did, we made 300 recommendations, and they implemented, the manager, Tom Marcus, implemented 299 of the 300 recommendations. I mean, it's just extraordinary. The one he didn't put in is we recommended a coffee shop in Booth Park. And that was just a bridge too far. But, I mean, that's pretty good. 299 out of 300. Usually statistically only about a third of my recommendations get implemented. So I bet 300 is how I look at it. Thank you very much for listening to me. It's nice to meet you. Thank you.